Welcome to Nell Model Railway. I'm John. This is the place where we design and scratch build, kit build, and do lots of scenery. Hello once again, and in this video, part 3 of the motorway, I will cover adding the road surface, painting the road surface, painting the lane markings and edge lines, adding the curbs, adding the outside Armco barriers, the central reservation barrier, and weathering the road surface. Okay, before I laid the MDF road bed, I laid 2mm card and sealed it in the center so that it was a 2mm height differential between the center and the outer edge, so I'd have a camber on the road surface. I then laid and stuck down the 2mm card, cut it to shape, and then filled the gaps and gently sanded it. As you can see, I was assisted by a certain four-legged friend. I then sealed the MDF with the MDF primer, and whilst that was drying, turned my sights on Google to find some images of Armco barriers, primarily on raised sections of motorway in the UK, one of which you see here. I then decided that there was curbing as well, and went to our local DIY store and got some strips of angled PVC, which you can see in this image, thinking that one would be laid as the curb and the other would be laid as an edging strip to the edge of the flyover, but also add a nice straight edge to attach the uprights for the Armco barrier. And here is the wider piece of PVC stuck into place and held down whilst the glue was drying using masking tape. And you'll see that the two mitered joints that I had to cut to create the bend, I then filled with small bits of the same PVC. Here is the flyover with both parts of the plastic or the PVC stuck in place. So one above for the curbing and one below for the side. I then progressed on to painting the roadbed itself and used a combination mix of thunder and charcoal emulsion from the Dulux range, but of course just tester pots. I then sealed once it was dry with a matte varnish for later weathering. At this point, I suddenly realized that by adding the upper PVC, I still didn't have a curb line in order to put my chincilla sand in as drainage along the sides of the road. So had to incorporate another piece of evergreen plastic strip along the leading edge to provide me with the actual curb. I then proceeded to paint the outer edge strip, hanging down the edge of the flyover in a dark grey, and also the curb in a dark grey. The former I knew I was going to overpaint with a sand or buff colour, So I felt that the dark tone underneath would actually provide me with a mottled effect when I did the overpainting. After that, I went on to trusty Google to determine the dimensions of the white lines on the motorway. And on one of the sites, I found the dimensions of the white line being 3 meters in length and the gaps between lines being 10 meters in length. So I adopted this and masked up accordingly. And here are the finished lines. You'll also see that I've got solid white lines to the central reservation and the outer edges, which are the road engineer's way of identifying the maximum usable road width. Everything was hand painted with a white paint. I then turned my attention to the types of barriers that I would be using and decided to go for Armco barriers on the outer edges of the flyover to prevent cars falling down the terrifically high drop. And in the center, decided on using what is known as a Jersey barrier, which is concrete. And again, from Google, I was able to obtain the specific dimensions and decided that I would use my smaller bit of PVC cut finely in little strips to provide me with the uprights, the outer edge Armco barriers, but also got a piece of wood from DIY store, which is slightly mitered, which provided me with a rough Jersey barrier. I cut the piece of wood into the specific lengths of the Jersey barrier and then stuck that in place fairly quickly. And here you see the Armco posts in place and the rear painted, and also the Jersey barriers in place painted, and good old chincilla sand. Finally, I found a use for it, creating the drainage channels on the outside edges and the central reservation. I then started to glue in place the actual barriers, and here I used Evergeen 2mm by 2mm square rod. You'll see that I've cut off a couple of or 3 strips that I use to actually provide me with a clearance. So I laid those 3 down first, laid the full length strip on top, used super glue to put in some glue dabs, and then secured the barrier. Once it had taken, I removed the spacers and then glued all of the uprights to the barrier. I then moved on to using the same spacers. In fact, to tell a lie, I used 1.5mm by 1mm spacers with a 1mm on top to give me a 3-inch gap, and added a second row of 2mm square rod to that. The top part of the barrier didn't require any spacers, and you'll see all through the process I used wooden clothes pegs to hold each piece of strip in place while the glue went off, which only took 15 to 20 seconds. And here we have the finished Armco barriers painted in various grey washes. I then commenced the weathering treatment of the road bed, initially laying down a dark wash to resemble the tyre marks where the rubber comes off tyres. And you'll note that this was quite heavy, but I went back over it with wet and dry sandpaper to take it down, which did cut through some of the tarmac road bed, but in fact gave quite a good mottled surface, which I then corrected using various greys and other home mixes of paint to just incorporate different textures on the road surface. After the weathering was completed, I then had the difficult task in lugging this weighty flyover up into the loft and fitting it in situ. And here you see the finished article in place with the deflection barriers, which have still got to be weathered. I'm also pleased to report that no dining room tables were damaged in the production of this flyover. Thank you once again for watching, and I hope this video and the other preceding parts motivates you into doing your own modeling and creating things as opposed to necessarily buying them off the peg, so to speak. But thank you once again. I can't believe that my subscribers have gone over 650. But if you do like what you see, please keep following me. Hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get your notifications.